Welcome, everybody. It's just such a pleasure to see you all here. For this group, we seem to be quite a small group. There might be more people joining us later, but I'd really like to invite you to put your cameras on, because it would be really nice to see everybody who's decided to join us today. A very big welcome for those of you who were here for the beginning. We were playing a piece of music called "A Meeting by the River," which I really hope will set the tone for this gathering that we have with us today, because it's people who are I choose music often to theme my invitations, because I love it when it's bringing people together. So "The Meeting by the River" is a Western musician, guitarist, multi-instrumentalist called Rai Kuda, who some of you will know, and he's playing with Vishman Mohan Bhatt, who's a really gifted Indian sitar player. So I think that what the music that you heard describes the world I hope that we would all love to have, that harmony between human beings. So today we're going to invite you, really, I think some of you will be familiar with this story, but to hear a wider story of the human family. It really is about how, if we understand better our past, we can actually make different choices for a future, for a world with a future. I think there's a fantastic British-Nigerian writer called Ben Okri, and he puts it this way. He says, "We can only create a future from the depth of the truth that we face now." So we will grow up with a slice of a story, but I think in understanding a wider story of our human experience so far on this planet, we can make better choices for where we head next, particularly at this moment of extreme planetary crisis. I'm going to hand over to Christine in a minute to facilitate a discussion around our experiences of colonisation, climate change, the thoughts that are arising before we go into this workshop, and then Christine will hand back to me, and we'll actually look at this story. Before we do that, though, I would like to just do a reading for us again, to put us in that cosmic space, if you like, that to take us out of our tribes, of our politics, of the frames that are constructed to us in the now, and helicopter us up a little bit with this reading. I think some of you may also know this. It's from the brilliant astronomer Carl Sagan. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generations, all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The earth is the only world known so far to harbour life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment the earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. Yeah. So there we are. That's us. And let's have a little think about who we are in this room right now, and then we'll look a bit more depth at our human story. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Cindy. And I actually would just like to give some context here, because some of you know Cindy, but we have a couple of people here who don't. And I think there are people that have a greater, if it's the right word, right to speak on this topic because of lived experience. And I think you'll learn during this session that Cindy definitely has the right to speak in depth on this topic from personal experience. So what we're going to do is, interestingly, we had about 50-something people register for this, but you never know what you're going to get. So we're very grateful for you showing up, and we're very committed to giving you an incredibly rich experience. What we're going to do is, we were going to do breakouts, but it's such a small group. We're not going to do breakouts. So I'd like to hear some thoughts about your experiences as a colonizer. How that lands when you hear that. Your experiences as a colonizer. Is that, I've never thought of myself as a colonizer, or I've reconciled pieces of myself as a colonizer, or that makes me want to throw up, whatever that is. Your experience as a colonizer, part 1, and part 2, your experience of being colonized. So if anyone wants to open their mics and speak to your experience as a colonizer, or your awareness, or your the edges that you're exploring around that. Anyone willing to? Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
And Christine, it's absolutely the truth for me, given that I was brought up in the British public school system and indoctrinated, brainwashed into this idea at the time that the British Empire, which was all the pink bits on the map, and I got that in geography all the time, was supreme. It was exceptional, and it was far superior to anything else that existed on the map. And because I was a cathedral chorister, I remember singing hymns about the little brown children over the other side of the world who needed our love and help. And I've had to deal with the realization of that all my life, and I'm still grappling with that. And I deliberately engage today with some of the really fierce strategic decolonizers in the global south. As a woman called Samantha Supir, for example, who some of you might know in the Philippines, who really tears into me simply because that's who I am, and I can't do anything about that. However, I might try to change that mindset and worldview. The second part of the question, Christine, relate to the fact that we have all had our minds colonized by the propaganda that exists at the moment. And the most successful propaganda and most effective propaganda machine in the history of humanity is the Western US empire-led propaganda that comes out at the moment, which is actually toxic and destroying us. So those two elements.
Thank you for sharing that, Richard. Anyone else want to speak to your experience as a colonizer and being colonized?
Hi, my name's Ashley Brady. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a settler, cis, hetero, all the privileged elements, except maybe my gender. So yes, and I think like a lot of us here potentially have done a lot of that self work to understand privilege and everything that it entails in the really intersectional kind of way that that we experience it. But yeah, and the colonizer that doesn't that kind of just sits, doesn't I don't feel a reaction. If anything, yeah, potentially that kind of guilt, but I think in a really helpful way of guilt in that it sits to recognize your privilege, not the shame carrying guilt. Like not anyway, kind of partly.
Mm.
But I think as well, like I come from a regional town and the realities of land holders and landowners historically, especially rural landholders and agriculturalists, and the realities of abuses against Aboriginal people from and the enslavement of Aboriginal people and all those things that also I don't think we have a lot of literacy on as Australians unless you do the work to understand that kind of cultural legacies and literacy of experiences of the colonial impacts on the Indigenous people here in this country. So I feel that, yeah, that very much depends and of the work you do, I think, to find those things out. Your feelings would depend on that. And I'm not sure if I fully understand the second part of your question. Sorry.
It's
Yeah.
and being colonized. Have you any experience of yourself being colonized?
I'm not fully sure if I understand what that means. Sorry, are you able to explain it a bit more? You mean?
So this is where the rough version of colonization is another coming and taking from without your permission and profiting from that, or having a better experience from your something without there being permission, or a tribe something, or a community or a nation something. So it's a form of taking, exploitation, use. You have not given permission, and the other party is, I'm using the word profiting, but benefiting from what they're taking from you. Richard, do you want to say, is there any, if I missed an elaboration on that? Oh, I got it. We call it Cindy. Yep. Yeah. So that.
I'm not sure if I've felt those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ashley. Go, please carry on. Yeah.
No, finished. Sorry.
Really interesting. It's very an interesting contrast to your response, Richard, where you feel that there is this colonization of our minds that's going on with the story that we're told, with the hegemony of the story that works for the Western empire that we live under at the moment. And so it's sometimes it's recognizing. So I'm really interested in your comment there, Ashley, that you're feeling that it's you that you carry a guilt to an extent without the blame, as you say, which again, really, this isn't about guilt and blame, but it's maybe, as it would be interesting to see how we go with this discussion, because in some ways we're all put in this position of having been colonized. We are, our economic system, our global systems really operate to ask from us or take from us a certain type of life journey, really, that we participate in something, which we'll explore that more, in that is actually benefits an elite of this system, but for the rest of us, it depletes our planet, if on that larger scale. So yeah, interesting. There we go.
On that kind of that actually did prompt me to think. I mean, I grew up in a regional town that was also a mining town, so I guess I would say quality of life, all those those impacts. So I guess a more healthy environment has been colonized, right? Because of the
Yeah,
kind of impacts
totally.
of a very
But
polluting kind of
pollution,
industry
Yeah.
on our local environment. And I guess as well into yeah, acknowledging all the other privileges, but the realities of access to challenges in access to supports and infrastructure and all those things because of a very kind of urban centric colonial capitalist system that doesn't prioritize or recognize the kind of production loops and the importance of agricultural towns and all those types of things. Yeah.
well, yeah, all of those things, it happened on such different levels. Some that we're so used to the water we swim. I think that's the fish analogy. Don't mind me using it. It's we barely see the water that we swim in because that's all we know. So yeah, and I think it's important now to come together and to recognise those things because we've need to find a different way of being here. Really, if we're to find real. I was told not to use the word solutions for the systems crisis, for the planetary crisis anymore. It's more interventions given the state that we're at. Yeah.
Actually, another way to think about it is, have you ever felt exploited? And most people have some level of that experience. We can be exploited through wages. We can be exploited through not having opportunity access. We can be exploited through our gender. There's a whole lot of different things that can surface when you start to really sit in exploitation as a business model, or exploitation as a governance or community model. It's that type of exploitation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And it's important because Cindy mentioned the water that we swim in, if we're fish, and you don't see the water. Part of this work is to begin to see the water that we had, that is, as Richard said, we're so indoctrinated in, so enculturated in, that you can't see it. And then it's the recognition of that and go, oh, this is normal operations on planet Earth currently. Yeah. So thank you for that. Jane, you had your hand up? Hey, Brainy, good to see you.
Hi, Brandy. Lovely to see you.
I just wanted to underscore the subsets of colonization in terms of particularly patriarchy and other power relationships that are embedded in mechanisms of social control that ensure that we play our roles to enable, empower those that hold the power, and to point to the obscenity of the wealth of this planet being held in so few hands, while the very large swathes of our population suffer significantly.
Thanks, Jane. Anyone else want to comment about, where am I? What are talking to me about your experience as a colonizer or your experience as being colonized? Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
So I feel like I'm both a colonizer and a colonized person every time I go to the supermarket, because what I choose to buy and how I tend to relate to the economy is caught up in like multinational food companies, for example. And I'm a colonizer because I support them by buying their products. I'm also the colonized because I actually don't have a lot of choice about that. It's my daily existence.
Yeah. Absolutely. Michelle, I experience that. I get so furious sometimes because near where I live, sometimes there's local food markets, but it is you know that you're participating when you don't really want to participate, and it puts you in that, and it's it requires a lot of time and effort to try to make different choices in the simplest thing of what we eat. And that's so fundamental because it links all the way through from your point of purchase in that supermarket, all the way through the supply chain of that food, where it's come from, if you take a bar of chocolate, for example, even if you choose the fair trade chocolate, which is a bit of a misnomer because it still isn't really particularly fair. The cocoa production is very much still in that's local farmers who get paid a tiny amount of money compared to the huge amount of the profit that the chocolate companies make, and that goes into the marketing and to making us want that thing. And chocolate's an industry where people have tried, maybe a little bit more effort has been made, but in so many of our food choices, and then it's not only how the workers are treated, it's how the land has been treated to raise this crop at the scale that you need to make the profit of it. Food is such a brilliant example because it really connects into everything that it connects right through the system, right back to the land, which is the point of exploitation that is causing the biggest, the ecological breakdown. So yeah, that's a fantastic, good piece for us to hold as we move forward in the conversation. Really is.
I just wanted, Brainy, because I know you came in a bit late, I want you to let you know that the two questions that we're asking is your experience as a colonizer and or your experience of being colonized. And it's just an open mic and anyone can answer, speak to that. Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Thanks. I just wanted to add to what Jane was saying, because it's not just the patriarchy now, it's my generation, which is a gerontocracy, actually dominating the patriarchy, which again is unhelpful in that it's not allowing the young people of the world to step in to the space that they should be in.
That is, I am very delighted that you raised. Thank you, Richard.
At the same time, though, being discriminated against for ageism, and so whichever, I think, the systems work to cause oppression and to subjugate those who don't hold the levers of power. So it is this disempowerment and empowerment dynamic that is implicit in the models that we exist in.
Yeah, and I think that's I really think, yeah, totally with your comment, Richard, because who has the levers of power is this gerontocracy. But at the same time, the young people, but what Jane's talking about, youth is marketable, whereas age isn't. So there's this whole story that's told around where we had and respected elders, we now have got, you're shoved out after a certain point because the marketing is the youth is more commoditizable than age. So that's really important. Your point there again, Jane, and also the polarizing narratives that when I work with young people, we might talk about that a bit later on. I know Brainy does as well in the schools, but here, particularly in the UK, there's a narrative that it's the old people have made a terrible mess, and as young people, it's up to you to sort it out. You're inheriting this; they've done the bad, and you're going to do the good. Which I think is, simplifying it slightly, but I think it's really a terrifying story for young people, that because it's transgenerational, and we've got a lovely mix of ages in this room, and I've got a young daughter, and the last thing I'd like her to feel is that she has to stand alone. That there's a lot of elders, us, who have spent our life journey trying to work on systems change. I know you have, Richard. I look at you as an elder, and I think it's young people really draw strength from that when they know that they're supported. It's a transgenerational. I don't want to say struggle, but unfortunately it's to try to change this system. So yeah, I think that is another part of this kind of mental colonization, that people are polarized. Some people are put the age versus youth, all of these types of things. Solomon, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I don't have much to say. As I'm listening to everybody, the awareness arises in my mind that, and we did mention that last week, it's important that we move forward one step further and we become more specific into what type of colonization is a healthy type of colonization, in the sense, because we're talking about governance, we're talking about economics, we're talking about exploitations, but we have to start becoming aware that we do need production, we do need to be fed, we do need to govern ourselves, we do need to establish the criteria, okay, a clear criteria of where we are right now and how we can move forward in a consensual and healthy matter with all those things, because not everything is necessarily negative and is to be only criticized in the sense of rejected. Maybe it does need to be criticized in the sense of becoming aware of necessary transformation for things to move forward. And that's all I feel like I can add to the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Solomon. Just a couple of things about that before I go back to Michelle. I think there are some essential ingredients in the colonizing cake, dare I say it. And so I would propose that what you're speaking about, Solomon, we may need a different language set. So in the and there's a scientific background, bacteria colonize and so on, but the difference with bacteria and colonization is that the moment they get into monopoly, then nature has a way of filling that up, because monopoly can't exist in nature. And so some of the elements of the colonizing cake are things like exploitation, dehumanization, not treating the land or the people with any respect at all, just there as objects for taking and abuse and exploitation and extraction to extinction. They're the colonizing features. And so if we're speaking about what you're addressing, I think, which is we need to have governance, we need to have all of this, we need to produce food, we need to do these things. I think there is a different way of placing that in language that does not reanimate the almost autopilot exploitation and all of the cake ingredients that I mentioned that make up the colonization that we've experienced for most of human history and still do. But just wanted to make that distinction.
No, exactly. My point is that we need to move forward, as I said, in a different way.
Yeah.
Because we do not need, in my opinion, to remain focused on what we observe as being negative. We need to start focusing on what we consensually consider positive and focus on that and build the positive and make everybody aware that is not aware, even those colonizers, that there is this other way instead of being static, so to speak. But more.
Yeah. So before we go into Cindy's session, we're going to have a break. And just before we do the break, I'm just going to give you some context for that, which may help framing piece. Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
Michelle had. Yeah, Michelle had. I'm just inviting
Yeah.
Michelle to.
So just focusing on that idea of not everything is negative. I don't know where people get their news, but I get mine from the ABC nightly 7 o'clock news. And it's bad. It's all bad news. It seems to me they should have a responsibility to promote good news stories so that people can learn from each other about how to live and how to cope with this human predicament. But the news is not about that, about positive empowerment of people. It's bad news. That's pretty much what they report.
And just for context here, Michelle is referred, because we've got people who are not from Australia on the call. So Michelle's referring to the Australian National Broadcast, which is the public broadcast radio station. And there is rumour and quite substantiation that the ABC has been also now flourishes off selling drama and threats more than it does news that actually does what Michelle's speaking to. So it too seems to have fallen down. It makes more sense to get more eyeballs on a screen by having people be afraid and terrified than to have the good news story, because good news stories don't sell so much, apparently. Yeah.
Hard to understand that, isn't it?
It is. Jane, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just back to Solomon's comment around, and I think Richard as well, and Cindy, talking to the polarity that we are forced into in the way in which our system operates. And I think the opportunity is in collaboration, and the risk is in us trying to do something that dismisses what has come before, but rather, as you say, Cindy, we need to understand what has come before we can move forward with what needs to come into the future. But we need to bring others with us. And so the key in all of this is the syntropic approach of collaboration and engagement and bringing people in relationship on the journey, rather than defaulting to the methodology which we are rejecting of the empowerment, disempowerment, and duality, extraction and extinction. So I think there's a real challenge in there, not only in terms of the content, but the journey and the engagement piece for us.
Yeah, I think so much, Jane. I just wanted to pick up on just a personal comment on what Michelle has said, because we have this incredible media that can reach us in almost every element of our lives now, in our living rooms, in the palm of our hands. And yet the messaging that comes down through it, we really, for the state that we're in as a human family, we need to know what we can do, and we need to be encouraged to do it, and we need to show how the progress that we make when we do those things. That could be a daily show. That could be something you could tap into it. Here, you guys coming in from Sydney, this is what Sydney's doing today. This is, Brainy, I'm not sure which country you're in. Here I am. You're in Uganda. This is what Uganda's doing today. This is what the UK, and we could see ourselves as this human family taking these collective impacts that are shifting the dial instead of just being dumped with the horror stories. So yeah, I think that is, again, you touched on two things. Food is so powerful, and how we connect collectively through this media that's ubiquitous, but it's used in such a divisive and distracting way to keep us from coming together and using our collective human power to change this story. Yeah, really interesting.
So yeah,
If you're going to say something.
yeah, Brainy, do you want to say anything about your experience of colonisation in Uganda? You don't have to, it's optional.
Oh, thank you. So in my own experience, as someone who is working on a startup, and who knows the time that it takes to build a startup or in your community-based organization, it's really challenging to see many forms of colonization from language. So once you need money to fund your work, you need to speak English or either French. That's one. Then two, you need to prioritize the priorities of the grantor. The grantor doesn't want to know your problem, but he knows his problem. He has his own priorities and conditions. So that's what you should learn. He doesn't want to learn about you, about your work, about your condition, but you to learn about him and what he finds. If you don't align with their priority, you don't get money. That form of collaboration. And I was thinking that maybe there could be a global movement to build a philanthropic fund that can abolish all that, because people are going to be trapped into the money trap. And that's it. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Bryony. It's on the list, Bryony, a Centropic Fund.
But you so totally that's such a huge topic. Is who sets the agenda, really. The fund, one hat I wear is on a philanthropic board, and it's just who sets the agenda, what is considered worthy, what is fundable, and the power dynamic in that is immense. Yeah, really.
We're going to, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you just a space and some context, because we're going to have a short break, because Cindy's going to do a presentation, and then we're going to debrief that, and then we're going to talk about the future. And so that's going to be a longer session. So we're not expecting you to sit on, cross your legs or not have a drink or anything else like that between. So we're going to have a short break shortly in a moment. But I wanted to set some context for this next session, and I'm going to undo my screen so that you can see. Oops, not that. Choose virtual background. None. All right. So this is the room I'm in, and you can see behind me this. Everyone? Yeah. Oops, I just have to take that away so I can see your faces. All right. A little bit more context here. I'll speak. Cindy's writing a book. I've had around this topic, and I've had the amazing privilege to read the outline of this, and it is an extraordinary body of work around colonisation. And what she's going to go into is like the tip of the iceberg about this. And it can land with us in various different ways, depending on our experience, depending on how much we know, depending on our background, depending on our stories, things we believe. So first and foremost is there is no right or wrong way for this to land. There just is, and it is at the very minimum what we hope is curiosity, and to build curiosity to really understand this work, how we got here as humans. Because I agree, Solomon, we have to move forward, but part of moving forward is understanding how we got here. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this workshop, is because that piece of understanding. And so what I would ask you to do during Cindy's presentation is just make note of any area where you get a charge, or you feel a bit icky, or something like, how can that be? Or that's not true, or something like that. Just make notes so that you're just registering that this is landing for you. It's different for everybody, depending on your experience and your education background and your exposure, your culture, where you're from. But I wanted to give you a framing for how we move through this. If we're an effect of something and we have no awareness of being an effect of, so let me give you an example of that. Somebody who is deliberately held in a lower caste system, so lacking education, lacking opportunity, lacking internet access, lacking social skills, so there's a deliberateness to that, is at effect of that system. but is potentially most likely unaware that they are in the fish in the water and they can't see the water. So that's an effect. We all have that to a degree where we're at effect of something that we're unaware of. The sort of next stage that we go to is that we're at effect, but we start to become aware of it. We realize we can, as the fish, we can start to see the water that we're in. Then we go to confronting it. Confront, to put in front of. Because in order to go to the other side of this, the positive side that Solomon spoke of, you have to confront it. You have to confront it. You have to see it for what it is. You have to name the truth of it. This includes our own behavior. You know, if we have behavior that is not coherent with who we want to be in the world, you got to confront it. You got to see it first and confront it. So what we're doing in this next piece is we're giving you an opportunity to begin to confront this. I believe, and Richard spoke to this as well, is that this is not something that happens in a few hours. This is a process over time because it's like the onion layer and it's peeling. And going back to Ashley, language and how we use language and how we have never thought, oh, yes, I've felt exploited, or I live in a rural mining town, and there's been this disparity between rural and regional and urban. And so it's layers and layers. And then there is a piece around reconciliation, how we make sense of this, how we put it all together, how we allow the grief and the shame and the agony and so on. And the things like Richard mentioned, where someone who has been a terrible effect of colonization has the rage of the injustice and is responding in the only way they know how, which is to make someone like me, who I didn't choose the path to be born here, but I've got to be aware of it. And so the rage from that directed at a person is not going to help us go towards a solution. Rage at the system, rage at the underpinnings of what has created it, that's appropriate. Rage at people who absolutely insist on continuing to propagate it willfully, that's appropriate. So there's a reconciliation, and then there's an opportunity with reconciliation to begin to take responsibility. And then finally, we go to how we create. So this is what Solomon mentioned. How do we create? How do we create a system that doesn't have the very features that we've had to confront? So just to give you that sort of understanding of the process, it's a journey. It's a journey. It's not a weekend workshop. It's a journey. It's layered. It's complex. It's nuanced. It's fumbling. We try and figure it out with each other. There's big subjects behind this, things like reparations and huge things that we simply haven't even begun to have discussions on. And so the purpose behind this workshop is really just to begin to seed the process so that more and more people can be up here creating something different. Cindy, do you want to say anything else about that?
No, that's great, Christine. I'm one of the people that needs a loo break, so my yeah, a good point to stop, and then I'll say a little bit more about where we're going when so
Yeah.
this. Well, yeah, the next piece I will take. It is some. I will be reading some bits, but hopefully I'll be speaking more than reading. But yeah, this is really a kind of journey into when looking at the 500-year story of colonization from the beginnings of the Portuguese setting off and Columbus to the present day. So it's telling that history, so we can actually look. It's not so much. It is the facts about what happened, and in that happening, how it's shaped our belief system as well. So I want to again, this is it's lovely to spend this time with you, but it's a shorter time than we would cover some of this material. So it's going to be, how did enabling this to happen shape how we think now, or not ours in this room, but how our operating systems work? There's got lots of different reasons that I was prompted to write the book, but one of them, I wear lots of different hats. I'm an author. I've been with an activist. I've worked in the space of systems change for a long time, a very long time, and I was invited to an event at the British Academy, which is a poshy place where the great and the good gather. And this event was to talk about solutions to climate change. And it was not terribly long ago. I was in the room with somebody, a very Lord Stern, who'd written probably people like Richard are familiar with the Stern report, but this definitive report on what's happening in the state of our planet. And people were talking from different spaces. But no, there was an Indian woman in the room, and she was the only person that mentioned. She was very timid, and you could see it was taking her a huge amount of courage to raise this topic, because we'd been through all sorts of the carbon capture, the CSR, corporate social responsibility, but it's all that rearranging the deck chair on the Titanic stuff. And then this woman timidly put up her hand and choked out the words and about colonisation and climate change. It wasn't on the agenda at all. And the process was this: Lord Stern would hear what everybody had to say, take the first round, make a summary of that, and present it back to us. So I was sitting behind this woman who was having trouble speaking, and I thought, you have no idea who's sitting behind you, my dear, but I've got your back. Because I said, if he doesn't pick up on what she said, and I was betting myself 99%, I'm going to say he's not going to pick. He's going to pick up on everything else, on the CSR and the ESG and the impact investing and the carbon capture and the thing, those machines that are going to zonk carbon out the air. Not a chance are they going to do that fast enough. And I thought she's going to pick up on everything apart from what she said. And if he does that, I'm going for it. And so sure enough, he picked up on everything else in the room except what this poor woman had choked out. She was shaking like this and had managed to find the courage to say. So I put up my hand again, because I'd made my contribution, and then said, Cindy, and I just went, bang. It really did. I don't mean to say it horribly, because it's not what Samantha's doing too. It's not about guilt and blame. It's just about let's be real here. Let's take the big view and see how we did get here. So the room went quiet, and then people started to speak. And one woman put up her hand and she said, I'm an economist. I'm trained at the London School of Economics, which I work with Lord Stern on policy, on climate action. And I heard my children saying something about this, but I had absolutely no idea how colonisation links to climate change until you spoke. And I think it's so irresponsible that you've got people at that senior policy level who are making decisions. It's almost like trying to bake a cake and you've forgotten to have the flour or the eggs. You've just got the flour. You've got the flour and the sugar. You haven't got the eggs, the butter. How on earth are you going to come up with something that answers the description of how we address climate change if you don't know how on earth we've got what this encompasses? So there. But obviously the issue isn't with the woman herself. She was really brave to put up her hand. It is the education system. What counts? What's considered valuable? What you were saying, Brainy, who sets the agenda for what we decide we can bring to the table, what we want to know about ourselves, what we consider is worth teaching. So the first thing if I can find it here, there's a quote from a very learned person called David Orr. He's an education professor who comes from the environment side of things, but he's got this brilliant. What did he say? He says, many things on which our future health and prosperity depend are in dire jeopardy. Climate stability, the resilience and productivity of our natural systems, the beauty of the natural world, biological diversity. And he says it's worth noting that this is not the work of ignorant people. It's largely the result of the work by people with BAs, MBAs, PhDs, every kind of qualification you can throw at it, these people have got, but they haven't got this knowledge that will make us see our world so differently. I want to show us a short video in a minute, which will look at where we are, where we really need, where we can get to. But just in a very short summary, and again, apologies to anybody who finds the language in this distressing or the subject matter, but it is about trying to surface this relatively succinctly. So what's the story that these very educated people just hasn't got through? In a 1939 essay by one of my fantastic people, George Orwell, he wrote "Not Counting Niggers," and he uses the word ironically, and that was a word in 1939 that was in current usage. That's how people like me were routinely described. So he's using that word as just as an irony. So and it's a brilliant essay. And he says, in essence, he defines empires. He says, in essence, then empires are nothing but mechanisms for exploiting cheap coloured labour. And he's furious in this essay. I love the way he keeps his emotions come out in the acerbicness of his writing. But he's absolutely bristling in this essay because here goes the West. They're off to fight fascism in the righteous name of democracy, but they've conveniently forgotten that they've got 600, the French and the British Empire alone have got 600 million people, human beings who are completely disenfranchised, no vote, no nothing, no worth. And draw this the state in 1939, because in fact Hitler, who the West is now going to fight, he's modelled his approach on the imperial playbook. And Sven Lindqvist, if you want to look at this in more detail, he's written a book called Exterminate the Brutes, which goes into this in some depth. Hitler modelled his playbook on the Western colonisation. The colonisation of North America was his ideal. Now, these are territories that have been taken by force. Concentration camps are a routine method of domination. That in the Boer War, the Arab Revolt in the 30s, the serially in India, it was used in Australia, as you pointed out, Ashley. There was concentration camps used to subjugate the Aboriginal people. Genocide has been a long-standing and widespread practice of taking over territory for settler populations, Australia, New Zealand, North and South America, or to get access to land, such as in the Caribbean, Africa and Southeast Asia. So the time that Orwell's writing this, starvation has killed probably tens or hundreds of millions of people in India due to colonial policies that they didn't even really bother to count them because life was so dispensable. By 1942, another 3 million Indian people will die because Churchill decides to deliver food to Britain during the war. He takes the Indian wheat and he delivers that to Britain during the war, as opposed to... So the Indians starve. There's another famine in India. 3 million more Indians died. We've used slave labour, indentured labour, transported millions of people from Africa, India, China and Southeast Asia to work on plantations, mines, other industries in colonial territories to be this engine of prosperity for a master race. Europe's colonised more than 80% of the world, peaking in 1914, I think. And so this whole thing that we don't see, or the people didn't see who were going off to fight, it's a 500-year holocaust for much of the human family and for the land, because Earth, which we'll look at in a minute, has been a major casualty. But even now in our Western story, the only incidence of that kind of brutality to people that is acknowledged, and thankfully it is acknowledged and mourned, is of course the Holocaust from 1939 to 45 that was inflicted with absolute cruelty and abomination on the Jewish people. But the reason, in a way, that's used is because it allows people, the West, to launder themselves, really. We were good, we went in and we fought we defended and we did the morally right thing, at the same time as completely ignoring this Holocaust that has been going on for 500 years, for every most of the non-European world. And I will talk to some incidents that I'm not using that word lightly. The loss of human life and the cruelty, the way that is done, is staggering. But that's the story that we're not allowed to tell. It's very hard to tell the story, and I'm trying to work out how to fit this enormously into such a short into a period of time. You can't tell it by every incident because you'd end up with a book that would run to thousands of pages. You couldn't tell it by the commodity, the opium, the sugar, the palm oil, the cotton, the rubber, the tobacco, the coffee, the tea, the ivory, the gold, the diamonds, the silver, everything that was extracted, because again, you'd end up with this monster. So I try to, in the way that I'm telling the story in my book is as a 12-bar blues. Actually, that's another, I'll come back to that perhaps at another time. But it's just to give a kind of essence of what happened and to elicit some sort of emotional response to this, because the whole point of it is to try to give us this kind of awakening, this evolution of consciousness, if you like, so that we can see what was done to all of us in a way, because if you're at the sharp end of colonisation, and most of my life has been affected by that, and I can get into that story, from my ancestors all the way through to my immediate life. That's a very hard legacy to carry, and it will. You're talking about access to education, access to well, not a lot of people would take as a right in their life, and I feel like where I sit now, I'm a very privileged person. I'm not in any way the most person who suffered the most, but that's visible. It's obvious. I think that the rest, I do talk about a human family because I think that's who we are. We recognise this, but everybody was brutalised in this process. And I think we live in a process of brutalisation. The decisions that are made in boardrooms, they must increase value for shareholders. This is totally legitimised exploiting people and nature, and to speak it as a language that doesn't make everybody shudder. How are you going to increase that value for shareholders? That's exploitation that you just that is necessary for these corporates to balance their books, which is it's a kind of insanity. The Native Americans, and I'll come back to this, they had a word for it, which was called wetico, and I will talk about that as we go through, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Yeah, so as I've said, should we bury these stories? And another thing in finding out how to tell this, and this is not it's not at all unknown, but it's very, and then that's part of the reason I use music to tell the story, because the musicians could speak. You weren't, a lot of you couldn't speak out. You were murderously oppressed, but in the whole, to carry the story from the drums that came from West Africa through the Americas, the blues, the field hollers, the gospel churches, people weren't allowed to gather really, but then they saw this church as a way of control. And when the black communities would gather in the churches, and this rhythm comes through again, meets with the British hymns that they were required to sing, and then you get gospel. So this explosion of expression carries the story all the way through, and it was the only way at some points that you were allowed to have a voice. So I use music as a messenger through the books I'm writing, because it was murderous to speak out. You could be lynched simply for walking down the road, let alone for making eye contact with a white person at certain points in the American South. That triggered the lynching of Emmett Till. But and it goes on to this day, the black historians that tell this story, there's a leading British black historian called Joe David Olusoga. He has to travel with a bodyguard now because he had the temerity to write a book on this. So it's still information that isn't wanted in the world. So to go buckle under and say, I'm not going to speak, feels wrong to me at a time that we really need to understand what's happening to us. But certainly not in that attacking way, Richard, that you spoke. I don't think that's helpful. I think it happened to all of us. I talk about my own background. I'm a very mixed heritage person. I've got my daughter insisted that I do a DNA test when she was 16. It was just what she wanted to do. I know my story. My dad is a black Guyanese and my mum's a white Welsh woman. But when you unpick that, you get Senegambia, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Angola, the Congo, Ghana, Nigeria, Guinea. That's my African heritage. Then on the European side, I've got Scandinavian, Irish, British, French, German, Dutch. I've got West Asian and Middle Eastern ancestry and indigenous from South America. Here I am, an embodiment of humanity, really. And I think that if we don't learn from who we are, we lose this opportunity to, if we get caught up in blaming who did what to who, exactly as Christine said. Yes, I am absolutely furious with the system that continues to perpetrate it, but I'm most certainly not furious with my friend Richard, who cannot help where he landed on planet Earth and has spent his life trying to work on this stuff, whether we see whether what his life experience will reveal different things to him than my life experience has revealed to me, but it's being open to hear those stories and working together that we get out of this. So that's the angle that I come from. So at this point, if we've got time, Christine, I would really like to look at that Layla June video. I think where I think that I saw this is Layla June, who's an Indigenous scholar and activist, and she said, humans are needed here. We can be an anchor ecosystem species. I'm like, hold on. I was like, what? This was a revelation, but it's actually really what all our work, I think probably a work of a lot of people in this room is around. We need to be this anchor ecosystem species, all our systems that we design. Just a sec, Christine, before you press go. But if we don't get, it isn't where we're going, it's where we came from. We lived for the first we've been here for 300,000 years, modern humans. For the first 97% of that time, we were an anchor ecosystem species at best, but at worst, people who really did understand that we rely on our natural world for our own survival. And it's only in that very last bit of time that we've lost connection to that. So if we could have a little look at what she says it more beautifully than me, with gorgeous images as well. Perhaps we'll watch the first 3 minutes of it later.
What if I told you that we belong here? What if I told you that the earth needs us? What if I told you I've seen my people turn deserts into gardens? For tens of thousands of years, native people of this land constructed beautiful gardens all around them. We were active agents in shaping the land to produce prolific abundance. We expanded and designed grasslands and forests for the benefit of all life. We became what the world calls a keystone species, or a species upon which entire ecosystems depend. And our cultures became keystone cultures, refined over time. Now, much was made about the positive environmental effect of the pandemic. As more people stayed home, pollution levels dropped, animals began to reclaim habitat, and the logical leap that many observers seemed to make was that the Earth would be better off without humans. I reject that leap. The Earth may be better off without certain systems we have created, but we are not those systems. We don't have to be, at least. What if the human hand and minds could be such a great gift to the earth that they sparked new life wherever people and purpose met? I'd like to share important Indigenous land management techniques in hopes that they might inform and inspire us today. The first is to tap into and align ourselves with the forces of nature. Why try to control the earth when you can work with her? In Southwest deserts, native farmers have leveraged the pre-existing topography of the land. They place their fields at the base of watersheds to catch every drop of the monsoon rains and the nutrients that flow down with them, carried down from upland soils. This alluvial farming technique requires no outside fertilizers or irrigation because all of this comes with the rain. Another fascinating land management technique is intentional habitat expansion. Why put plants and animals into farms and cages when you can simply make a home for them and they come to you? Indigenous peoples have intentionally augmented grasslands for buffalo by bringing gentle fire to the Great Plains. We would transform dead plant tissues into nutrient-dense ash, nourishing the soil and unlocking the seed of pyroadapted grasses and medicines like echinacea. Over time, this fire would prevent trees and shrubs from taking over the grasslands and would nourish the soil to generate topsoils up to 4 feet deep. Many people think that we followed the buffalo, when in fact the buffalo followed our fire. A third strategy is to create non-human-centric systems. Why hoard for your own species when you can live to serve all life around you? Coastal nations of British Columbia enhance fish habitat by planting kelp forests where the herring lay their eggs. This helps that small silverfish lay even more eggs, and both the eggs and the hatched herringfish cascade up the food chain, nourishing so many other life forms such as bear, salmon, orca, eagles, wolves, and more. By seeding this food web and feeding all life around them, coastal nations have greater food security for themselves because they feed the hand that feeds them. These are the types of food and land management systems that Europeans came across as they spread westward. They often mislabeled them as terra nullius, or virgin land, or wilderness, instead of what they really were: living heirlooms, thousands of years in the making.
Yeah. So it is about how these systems. I don't think we need to. We have much more technology at our disposal now. We have all sorts of things that can really help us to be this anchor ecosystem species. And I think it's so inspiring, really, to have that put so simply, that we know that we need to shift from this egocentric worldview to an ecocentric worldview. But all of our systems now are wholly extractive. That instead of feeding the hand that feeds you, that you take as much as you possibly can wherever you go. And that was the colonizing project. But it is so interesting to see how and to think of all the different ways that we did have of living here, as you saw from that video. I think I wanted to say, so But the Europe at the time that the people were leaving from to come on this colonization, it had got into this mess because it had been ruled by hierarchy, conflict, and division. That was the belief system that had become dominant there. The Enclosures Act in Britain had reduced the peasantry to landless poverty. There was enough land, and there was enough food and abundance that came from that land. It had been hoarded by the many, by the few, and deprived the many. So I think we need more, but and that's the system that we're replicating now. We're just going out looking for more and more resources rather than working out how to live in balance with what we have. Even control, as the Aboriginal people do and other Indigenous people, they control their population sizes to suit the resources that they have around in the natural world. Whereas our economy is based on getting as many human beings as possible because we need to consume. It's based on this consuming. So when the Europeans left, Europe is swept by epidemics of plague, smallpox, syphilis, this terrible diseases which they take with them. I don't know how the disease developed, but the cities are violent, they're insanitary, they're riddled by the pestilence. 1 in 6 Londoners died of plague right up to the 1600s. The wealthy ate to excess while children starved. And this is a quote from David Stannard, who wrote the book American Holocaust. He said, "With neither culturally developed systems or social obligation and restraint in place, no effective police forces in their stead, the cities of Europe of the 15th and the 16th centuries were little more than chaotic population agglomerates with entire sections serving as residential turfs for thieves and brigands." So you've got nothing to control this greed, and it's created violence because you're either grabbing as much as you can and then you've got to defend yourself, or you go under. And it's such a contrast to the systems that they encountered when they went to abroad. And to maintain this system, it relies on status and on power. So you have to have access to more of this, to more silver and more gold. Again, a quote from Dave. He's quoting a Venetian commentator at the time. He says, "Gold has become for European the sinews of all government, its mind, its soul, its essence, and its very life." And in a way, that's where we still are. So these wars for further, Europe was at war with itself for more power, for more resources. They continually raged, emptying the coffers. And so then you'd have to go out and tax the poor to get more money, which put them in a worse situation, or you'd have to go off and find more wealth. So this system, which is rooted in amassing and exhausting resources, people, land, and money, in the interest of elite, exports itself to a place where people are living. And it's not the conflict. There's tensions in all societies, but they were living according to a very different belief system. And there's an Australian historian called Henry Reynolds. Some of you may know. In his book, The Other Side of the Frontier, he really names this. He says the settlers were transplanting a policy of possessive individualism, hierarchy, and inequality, and the Aboriginal societies were reciprocal and materially egalitarian. Though there were important political and religious inequalities based on age and sex, two such diametrically opposed societies could not merge without conflict. One or the other had to prevail. And I think globally, that's what's happened. This system that goes in to take as much as it can get has obviously taken everything, or as much as it possibly can, from people who weren't thinking that way. There's a letter from Columbus writes to the Spanish royal finance officer, which kind of epitomizes this. He writes of the people that he encountered in the Americas. "Since they have become more assured and are losing their terror, they are artless and generous with what they have, to such a degree as no one would believe him who had seen it. Of anything they have, if it be asked for, they never say no, but do rather invite the person to accept it, and show as much lovingness as though they would give their hearts, and they know no sect nor idolatry, save that they believe that all power and goodness are in the sky. And this comes not because they are ignorant. On the contrary, there are men of very subtle wit, who navigate all these seas and who give marvellous good account of everything." So he means incredibly generous, beautiful people who really don't have a clue what he's on about, what he's arrived to do. And his response to them is to rob, enslave, and to butcher them. He says, as soon as I arrived in the Indies, the first island that I found, I took some of them by force. Their Spanish highnesses may see that I shall give them, the Spanish crown, as much gold as they may need, and slaves as many as they shall order or to be shipped. So within a generation, most of the Americas, it's terrible. The population's descended by 90% in most of the Americas. They just wiped them out. They went rushing for this gold. And when you get these two belief systems that collide, that one is designed to eat the other. And that is really the system that we're still in. It's dressed up in different ways, but we're now in real neoliberalism, a form of capitalism that I've heard George Monbiot, the British journalist, describe a couple of days ago on a talk he was giving, as back to this raw form of extraction from colonisation. And Layla June there spoke about this concept of terra nullius, which really gave license to these land grabs. So you can see that the people were stewarding this land. If you look at a map of the North Americas or South Americas of Australia, it's divided very carefully into territories. Humans are stewarding this land, but for the Western world, it just looked like wilderness, and it gave this license to go in and take it. That's particularly that terra nullius law in Australia. That was put into law that when the settlers arrived, there was nobody there, so you could just go and take whatever you needed to take. If you encountered any humans, it was up to you to deal with, to work out how to deal with them. Unfortunately, the method that was chosen most of the time was massacre. People were just wiped out in the same way as in the Americas. And when you get this, so that's the concept of terra nullius, that the land belonged to nobody. It belonged to people. Humans have been in habitation on planet Earth for 300,000 years. So all the land was under stewardship, but it just didn't look like a system that the West could recognise. But the notion of terraforming, on the other hand, is not a fiction. That's very real. So wherever this is where Earth has just been reconstructed. Wherever Europeans settled or conquered, they began to change the land. And I reference frequently a book by Amitav Ghosh called The Nutmeg Curse, because he goes into this in much greater detail and much more eloquence than I can. But essentially, we disrupt the whole ecosystem of Earth. As colonisers take over the territories, they set around recreating the land systems that replicate Europe, with the farmlands, which are actually ecological deserts with plantations, with industrial cities, with industrial scale farming and huge scale resource extraction, because of this mindset that you need status, money, power. You've got to extract resources rapidly to get it. When I speak about, there's a book called The Island of Dr. Moreau, which some of you may know, which is actually a metaphor for colonisation, because he talks about how humans were. It's horrible. It's a brilliant book, but Dr. Moreau's an evil genius who's changing animals into humans, but I think that metaphor goes beyond that. So he's talking about colonisation shaping people into things that they don't want to be. But I think the metaphor is broader than that, actually. And we shape the land into something that it didn't want to be. When you hear the animals on the island scream and they shriek, and I hear that in the shrieking of the storms, in the roaring of the floodwaters that are rising, and the rumbling of the landslides, because right across the earth, all the ecosystems were disrupted. So the forests come out in North and South America, they're replaced with agricultural cultivation. Australia, New Zealand, the same thing happens. Vast tracts of Southeast Asia and South America, almost all of the Caribbean islands are cleared for plantation. India, Pakistan, hugely deforested. Water courses are changed. The directions of the water courses are changed to suit the irrigation that's needed for this mass scale production. The same in Africa, desertification and deforestation. The the people are told to stop the traditional farming methods and to cut down the forest and replace them with plantations for cotton, for sugar, for cash crops. By this is a study in a reputable, it's called Forest Frontiers and Forest for Global Change. It shows that by 500 years later, only 3% of Earth's land surface remains ecologically pristine. So it's a massive body blow for planet Earth. And if you just think of the land mass that those countries that they cover, in 2022, for the first time, the International Panel on the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, cites colonisation as a reason for climate change. It's a tiny little reference, and it's all dressed up in qualifying words. It is such an important recognition, because then it opens the way of seeing this to a very different set of, as I've just mentioned, I'm not allowed to use the word solutions, but interventions. But it's still done in such an understated way. North and South America cover a quarter of the land surface of the globe. That's been entirely terraformed. 50% of Australia's forests have gone. Within 60 years of colonisation, half of New Zealand's forests have gone. So it goes up. In some places, the ecosystems were totally wiped out, and they're just barren islands like St. Helena. In the Caribbean, I use Barbados as an example. That's the sugar. Sugar was that the wealth out of sugarcane grows fast. The demand for sugar spread so quickly that people were trying to use every bit of land they could to raise sugar. So the whole of Barbados is deforested. The mahogany, in West Indian mahogany, goes extinct. There's no wood. You've got to use the wood to boil the sugar as well. So by the mid-1600s, there's no sugar, there's no wood at all left on Barbados. They're even importing wood for South America, from North America. But the sugar is so extractive. Sugarcane takes so much moisture out of the soil that you've got these really rich yields, but they don't last for long because the soil just becomes exhausted. So the British or the French and the Dutch are active, and they're just moving from island to island, just raising the land and trying to get these really high yields, and bringing in enslaved people from Africa. And with the absolute, they're in a frenzy of greed. They're just destroying the land and bringing in people to try to get this money out as quickly as possible. And a lot of the Caribbean islands had extreme deforestation, which has left them much more vulnerable to hurricanes, to drought and flooding and erosion. And they've also changed weather patterns in that region. The same in Brazil. Sugarcane was one of the biggest depleters of the rainforest in Brazil, but that now goes on and on with every other commodity. Palm oil is the new sugar in a way. The Atlantic forests were gone. And we're such an arrogant species. This planet is 4.6 billion years old. So the feedback loops, so what looks like, we're making fortunes out of these commodities. The Earth time is not human time. What's happening now on Earth is 500 years later. That's her just going, I don't think so, reacting and showing us. It's the same mentality you get in the boardrooms where there's I referred to earlier. You've got the CEOs, we must deliver value for our shareholders, these short-term actions that are designed to extract maximum profit in the same way that these plantation economies did. That they're wrecking ecosystems and ecosystem resilience. We're still using this model to get this wealth in the short term, which is getting harder and harder to extract, actually. So in a way, our methods are becoming more brutal again. You can use the plantation analogy to cover what's happening in planet Earth. And so you've got structures of the land that you can look at very definitively, like in Sri Lanka, that was used for tea plantations up until the 1880s. It had nearly total forest cover. The Sri Lankans used the land to grow the food that they needed in the same way that you saw in the video. But the British and the Dutch come in with the coffee and the tea plantations. Now only 3% of of Sri Lanka is left forested. The rest has all been raised from that. So you get the landslides because the shallow root system of the tea plants can't hold the soil in the way that the deep trees could. That's just one example. What the flooding in. So yeah, and it's not just. I'll give some other physical examples, but I also want to talk about how the land is so tied up with the people, with society. You can't extract one from the other. So I'll use Sudan, and it sounds horrible, but almost every news story that you see where there's environmental degradation and conflict, you just need to peel back that layer very tight, a short amount, and you'll see that the root of it is in a complex set of things that will involve colonisation, environment, social disruption. So as an example, I'll use Sudan. It's now experiencing what the UN is calling the worst humanitarian crisis, which is affecting over 25 million people. And we're kind of trained that, that's Sudan, that's happening over there. But it's not getting hardly any global attention because we're encouraged to think that in modern politics, they don't want us to think about the past. It's just, things happen over a span of 10 to 20 years. So you can conveniently erase everything that led to getting up to this point. So I'd ask you if you went to a doctor and you said, I've got a serious injury or a serious condition, the doctor wouldn't say, what happened to you last week? They would say, what's your history? What's your medical history? They'd want to know what happened to you over a lifetime, whether it's a psychological injury or a physical injury. But for us, in our modern world, we erase everything. If we go back to look at Sudan, they're just stuck in this spiral of the legacies of colonisation, really, and each one makes the other worse. You've got environmental degradation, which fuels climate change with increasing floods and the drought that fuels food insecurity to the brink of famine now. You've got the disease thrown in that mix, the systemic underdevelopment and these racially stratified societies, which lead to this recurring conflict and civil war, which fuels the environmental degradation. So they go round and round. But if you look at what happened in colonial Sudan, it wasn't just the land was desertified for the plantations. It was mostly cotton originally. But you also had this divide and rule policy for the people. Sudan was divided into North and South Sudan. And the British decided who would be in power. They gave power without respect to the different groups, the different communities, the different groups. They just decided who would have power over who. And that just led to this massive distrust, fear and conflict between various Sudanese people. There's a paper written by Professor Louise Wilde. It's called The Genocide-Ecocide Nexus in Sudan. And she says this new ruling class has been seen by the South and the peripheries of the country as representing a new form of internal colonisation, continuing the process of plunder, violence and exploitation set in motion by the British. Far from celebrating independence in 1956, the process of decolonisation was seen by many as nothing more than a transfer of power from one colonial elite to another. And these divisions continue to haunt and sunder contemporary Sudan. There's so many countries in the world, we don't have time to cover them here, with huge respect. That is the same story. In Pakistan, we had these terrible floods. In 2022, a third of the fifth largest country in the world was underwater. Now, again, that goes back to how the water systems were treated. They were drastically re-engineered during colonizations, rivers diverted for irrigation. And not only that, but community structures were changed as well as the physical structures. There was a process, it's called the Zamindars were put, they'd worked communally, but then the British put the Zamindars in power to collect taxes for them. So they became, instead of allies, they became enemies and would people became more and more impoverished because the Zamindars got richer the more taxes they extracted, which they had to give a portion to the British. So you end up with people in wretched poverty who can't even respond to the changing environmental conditions. So you're still building houses in the worst places or scraping a living in the worst. So when the water systems explode, you've got these tragedies, and people are swept away. The same as in Hawaii, the forest fires in Maui. That was because the land had been changed from what you saw in the Leila June presentation there, these forests, fertile plains, wetland. They were desiccated for monoculture, sugar and pineapple plantations in this case. So it again, in the time that we have the whole thing is just being, ecological structures and social structures are being bent, buckled, annihilated with this colonial machinery. In terms of species, keystone species that hold the ecosystem together, they're taken out because they're commoditized. The African elephants for ivory, beavers are hugely important, and they're taken for their pelts. Tens of millions of them from Canada, from Peru, whales. That whales are utterly critical because they absorb, they're so huge in their own bodies, they absorb massive amounts of carbon, and they also, when they poo, whale poo is the keystone for phytoplankton that fertilizes the phytoplankton, which is the beginning of photosynthesis. That's how the oceans generate 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. But the whales are massively commoditized. They're taken out for corsets, street lighting, lubricants for guns, watches, sewing machines. So whale populations collapse. They go almost to extinction. It's a hugely long and devastating list. And the processes that are brought in to do that are people are you've got the slave empires come in, the indentured labor. As the Industrial Revolution grows, because there's all this money that's come from slavery, the colonized countries need to be marketplaces. So they've quashed manufacture in countries in Africa and India. These are deliberately dismantled. You have the Calico Acts in India, which banned the manufacture of this exquisite Indian cotton, and it bans the import of that into Britain, so that the Indians have to buy their cotton. That's why Gandhi had his homespun, and that was part of his protest. They have to buy the Indian. The cotton comes out of India, goes to the Lancashire mills, is processed there and woven industrially into far less beautiful fabric, but that's taken back and sold to the Indians. All the colonial countries, not only do they have to have their resources extracted from them, but they now need to be consumers of mass-produced goods, because the model works on the more that we can get people to consume, the richer we get. And this is really the neoliberal model that we're in. It's become its own kind of slave master now, because it works only by shackling countries to endless economic production. And if you want to look at that in more detail, then there's Jason Hickel's book called Less is More, which really does go into that into depth. I wouldn't be able to anyway, even if I could here. But it's left human beings we're at risk really of being diminished to little more than consumers, and nature is worth more dead than alive. And in the most vicious circle of them all, the very elements that can help us to survive, to reduce these emissions, our oceans, our forest and biodiversity, are sacked for the commodities that they contain, and then they're turned into more CO2. So we're caught in this really disastrous cycle. And I think what Richard said at the beginning, possibly the most devastating effect of colonisation is that it is the one that is had on our minds, because so many of us believe that this is the only system that there is. We feel the stress of work, and we feel the stress of being pumped into this to consume, to work in inegalitarian wage structure, but we can't really see anything else. We're just trapped in this in this belief that we can't redesign our systems in the way that Christine talks to so brilliantly, syntropically, that will take us back to being this anchor ecosystem species that we can be. And I'm going to finish there. There's a lot more that I could say, but I will. It's such a huge topic. It's hard to get into a small space. I just want to before we move on to what we can do about it. The consequences are just so they feed into almost every element of our economic systems were designed to support the colonial project. You've got the global financial system now, which is really just an extension of the IMF and the World Bank. They perpetuate this system of debt bondage and economic dependency. So it makes it almost financially impossible. When they talk about economic restructuring, what that means is that you have to open up your economy, stop all your social care programs, anything that's been money that's being spent on developing a social infrastructure, that stops. You open up your economy to global south north companies to come in to turn you into a replica of a Western system. But the money then goes out in the money that you're given as a loan is then given to a Western company to come in and invest and take over your infrastructure. Again, it's a huge topic, but so I won't get into that. But it just works to perpetrate that debt. The colonial era corporate laws, which were used to really justify pillage and slavery, set up as limited liability companies and corporate personhood. These still are the legal basis for companies to wreck the planet with impunity. So we have massive acts of corporate ecocide, which we can't challenge because companies have rights, but Mother Nature doesn't in our legal codes. So it goes on. The list is really extensive. The role of women relates to this patriarchal model. When the Age of Enlightenment talked about rights and liberties, but they extended to such a tiny amount of humanity, really elite white men. When America's founded, the Statue of Liberty, a woman holding the torch, women didn't have the right to vote. So it's colonized our belief system, it's colonized our legal codes, it's colonized our financial system. And in recognizing that on this rather distressing journey, I hope it hasn't been too difficult for people to hear, but the reason that I'm telling the story is so that we have the beginnings of this recognition and we can start to rebuild our models in a very different way. And that does bring us to the more joyful element of this work, which involves being in the room with people like you who really want to look at how that can be done. And a great joy to work with all of you. Some of you I do work with personally, and of course to be a pupil of Christine, who teaches us these principles of syntropy, and that's how we are trying to design. That's certainly how we're trying to design my own enterprise, Planetary. So I'm going to pause there and draw a breath and hand over to Christine to facilitate your response to what you have heard, or to how that resonates your own feelings, really.
Thank you, Cindy. So before we talk about possibility, I'd just like to, and if you can turn your camera on so that we can see you, because that makes it helpful, but I'd like to hear if there was any reflections or any, just listening to Cindy speak for less than an hour, and I know that she covered a lot, but if there's anything that you want to say or respond to that body of information and where it's landing for you. So this is where it's landing for you and how you feel. Have you ever connected that, particularly because this is a Sydney Climate Action Week event, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people that are attending the Climate Action Week have no idea of the intricacies of the connection of colonisation and climate. So I'd just really like to hear how that information is landing for you. Just either put your hand up or unmute and speak. That would be great.
I'm just going. Oh, right, Michelle.
Michelle, Ashley, and I think Brainy, you were going to speak as well. Yeah.
I just a few things that came to mind while you were speaking, Cindy. Thank you so much for that. It's such important stuff for people to recognize. And I hope that your voice is amplified many times. So I heard that you were talking about Sudan and the tragedy there. I heard that Australian companies are sold weapons to both sides of the conflict in Sudan. You mentioned ecocide at the end of your talk, and I think in a way people have started to liberate themselves from, for example, from slavery, that people to some extent have been liberated. And I think that process needs to continue, but I think we also need to look at the liberation of nature. And so the crime of actually having ecocide as a crime under international law is a really great step in that direction. And there are negotiations along those lines. Yeah, that's all I really want to say at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. There are certain, I do work a little bit with Stop Ecocide to make that an international law, and you're right. That's a brilliant example of systemically shifting what we legalise, what we recognise as acceptable human behaviour.
Yeah, so for example, a CEO of a fossil fuel company could be taken to the International Criminal Court for the crime of ecocide.
They're personally liable for it. Exactly. It will make all the difference.
Thanks, Michelle. Ashley, you had your hand up, I think.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Just quickly, I work in the kind of climate adaptation space and like kind of disaster recovery as well. And I think interesting when we've had conversations, particularly down on the south coast of Australia after the bushfires, looking at what regenerative practices look like, particularly pre-colonial regeneration and what native means, and the framing of native regeneration and reforestation. And yeah, just in that process, really unpacking what we understand to be native, that a lot of that is grounded in post-colonial vegetation and yeah, all those things, which, yeah, so just putting it out there. So as our what we think are interventions or solutions are actually, a lot of that is exactly grounded in kind of colonial neoliberal systems of things that were planted there for specific reasons and industries. And yeah,
that's fascinating, Ashley. It really is. Even our knowledge is so limited now because we transformed that. Even trying to learn from the land is harder because we transformed it so much that to unlearn that, to understand what was underneath that is even more of is more complicated for sure.
yeah. And I think the thing on top of that, was that the genocide of those Aboriginal communities and that loss of cultural knowledge meant that then it was really challenging to access that, because especially in those areas where we were talking about, literally Indigenous people there's been a mass, because of all the areas of the massacres, the erasure and the massacres mean that there isn't willingness to live in those locations either currently of Indigenous populations because of that trauma. So it's how do we, there's a lot of work.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry because of the time I didn't get to speak to this kind of human impact of the knowledge that we've lost, of the complications that you've just raised there. these whole other systems of governance and that have been taken out. That loss of that number of human beings
to access that pre-colonial knowledge. Yeah.
That's had a massive impact as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Bryony, did you have your hand up? Were you going to speak or not?
Oh, thank you.
And then
Thank you, Cindy, for your wonderful inspiration and insights. It's really touching on the side when I generalize and come up my own insights. The takeaway is that the tradition or the way pre-colonial life was, there's so many points that were changed that the art didn't like. And I think most of the corporate investments, industrialization across the continent of Africa and other developing countries, I think they consider monetary terms and they value, as you said, the value for shareholders, not the value for the art. I think that's where. And I think our best consultant should be in nature before we do anything. Before we consult the machine, before we consult money. But most people do care about the budget. Maybe the not the art prospect. And I think this is very disastrous. Like sometimes while I was on question, I was involved in some community which I left. I saw it doesn't work. Or the effective altruism. And they say they work and find or evidence-based solution. And the evidence-based solution was deworming children in Africa. And that's wrong. That's wrong. Doesn't work. Deworming children in Africa does not improve the part of education. They know the problem, but deworming is not the problem. Even distributing mosquito net is not the problem. But the problem is there is no kind of education. So when I called the question, I asked the question to the effective altruism community. I asked them, okay, after deworming children in Africa, can you send your kid to Uganda in one of the village, their schools in the village? They said no. Then why? Because you have dewormed children. That's because you didn't work on the real solution. The other one was something that I also realized was there is a continuous divide in terms of extraction. For example, companies do manufacture and produce and innovate new products, but most of the products that they produce, the byproducts, are more disastrous than the value company. For example, if you produce polythene bags, the value it creates is not as a result of the negative impact it creates from the world. Because there are so many polythene bags, there are so many plastic around. But when you see the product of public and handed to humanity and the earth, nothing. So I think some companies, I don't know, the value they have is on, it's an innovation because it is new, but it's not an innovation adding value to humanity and even the earth. So I think some services, and when I see the company coming to the state and then say, oh, we have this and we have this, the state doesn't ask who will collect all your waste and where will they go. So if a company brings products and if there are waste to be produced, the company, in fact, the buyers are responsible for their own waste. And it is supposed to be the company, not the buyers, not the citizens, not the government, not the art. I think these companies, there are some things we don't talk about, but when they are responsible, how can you produce product and then you bring money, you take away the money, and then you leave me with the waste, struggling with the waste. And the art is also struggling with your waste, with accounting.
Yeah.
So I think there's some of the issues that we need to think about before we call something innovation instead of something kind just exploitation. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant, Brainy. Totally. Yeah, you just totally sum it up. And it is. It's just the short-sightedness that I live in Cambridge, which calls itself Silicon Fen now. But what they call innovation, it's exactly that. There's all this funding for innovation. It's just new ways of producing something that doesn't really add any value. It has the capacity to make a few people, the ones that get the most funding are the ones that are likely to be unicorns. That means the $1 billion, they call the $1 billion. That's what innovation is. There's nothing innovative about it, is what we've always done. And we've got the disaster that you talked to that we've always had. Innovation means, again, back to a lot of the people's work on this, is designing things so that they benefit, so that they are regenerative, so that they do enable us to enable our life support system to flourish. You said it brilliantly, Brainy. I don't know why I'm recapping, but that is so that this whole word innovation makes my hair stand on end, because there's nothing innovative about it. It's just finding new ways to make money and create the same old problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And
Richard, you had your hand up.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks. Normally, Cindy and Christine know that I'm a bit of a firebrand in terms of change, but I'm going to urge caution, especially around the law, as we know, is inadequate to deal with a lot of things today. Ecocide, the law of ecocide is a really important breakthrough. I knew Polly Higgins and worked with Polly around the initial idea of what we could do. I think because I'd been working with Anita Roddick years and years ago around the formation of the Body Shop, and Polly heard about that story. But at the moment, I'm working with 3 male heads of state. One has been there for a while in South America. There's a new one who's just stepping into the position. I think it was yesterday or even today. And yet another one who's coming up to an election in 2 weeks' time and hopes to get re-elected. And what occurs to me, admittedly, these are all male, these are all potentially the people responsible for the system we're all denigrating, and correctly so. And I think it's important to understand that it is the system we should be changing and not blaming individuals, because each of these 3 people, one of them just the other day, was almost in tears, feeling so trapped in the circumstances of regulations and rules and laws that allow him to do certain things and not other things, probably the things that most need doing. And that also reminds me of, I was working with the CEO of a major bank in Australia, real tough guy, macho guy, in the news headlines all the time, ostensibly one of the people like the oil barons we should be hauling over the coals and saying enough is enough. And in the second session I had with him, he was in tears. He was sobbing for a good 10 minutes. I couldn't talk to him simply because, and then he said, surely, Richard, there's more to life than this. The pressures of this, the pressures of that. So I'm just think, unlike me, I just think we have to be a little bit cautious in establishing laws that go for an individual rather than a board or a group of people or a whole industry collective that are collectively responsible for the systems, and especially our most life-critical systems that we want to have changed.
In a way, thanks as always for that, Richard. Sounds like you're doing some fascinating and hugely valuable work as always. And you could argue with the ecocide law, and I would, that it would protect people like that, because then they'd have a tool to stand up and go to your board and say, I can't do that, because it will leave me personally exposed to a liability. I don't want to be taken to the International Criminal Court, thank you very much, so I'm not going to sign off on that. And if you want to sign off on that, you can go to the International Criminal Court and defend your decision. So I would, just before, oh, Ashley's gone. I was just going to say bye to Ashley, but she's gone now. But yeah, so I think that is so I would hope that the law would work in that way at the same time as putting people in the dock who really do need to go in the dock, like Bolsonaro or the CEOs of oil companies that do carry on willfully knowing that's what they're doing. But hopefully for the rest of the people that you're working with, it would give them that protection. It would give them something to hold up and say, I can't do that, because the world's now said that's unacceptable. So now I don't have to do that, I'd hope.
Yeah. Colleen, you had your hand, and then Jane.
I'm sorry that I had to step out briefly and come back in, but I've been listening in as much as I could today, and I have been reading The Nutmeg's Curse, and I got through the oil part, which is also huge. And I think what we're talking about is such massive systems change that recognizing the system, like you point out on your chart, Christine, no, first we have to recognize the water we're swimming in, which to me, this is definitely an awakening to so much more than I had seen so far. But then the ability to, like, how do we get to a place where there can be this massive systems change? Like the ecocide law is great, but it sounds like one of those deck chairs on the Titanic, right? Like we need massive systems change. And how do we create some sort of system where people can come together and co-create this? That's what we need, because these heads of state are trapped in the system and don't have the tools either. And yeah, we can't point fingers and say, well, it's up to you. You need to do something about it. But where's the brain? Where's the amazing, innovative thinking that we really need to change those systems that will, yeah. And that's what I'm hoping to, Syntropic, there it is. I believe has the tools. Yeah. And yeah.
Can I speak to that first, Cindy? So a couple of things about that, and this is, I agree with Richard. In my experience of working with people trapped in a lot of them white males who are perpetrators of the system, I've had similar experiences. They're human and they know they're trapped. But in reference to, this is the whole thinking behind the Syntropic world, and it goes back to Bucky Fuller's quote, don't try and change or fix the existing system. Build new models that make the existing obsolete. And I think about the conversation that we had, and Richard was there, I think Jane might have been there as well, on Monday with She Changes Climate. There is brilliance all over the world. We're not short of brilliance. We're not short of brilliant people, and we're not short of people who really want to put their energy behind this. It's a human coordination thing. How do we bring people together, and how do we do that in a way that enables diversity to synergize? And so this is entirely and has been from the beginning, the thinking and my work behind Syntropic World is there is a design science to that. Nature has a coordinate system, and the coordinate system works across every domain of existence, including people. And so the law, LORE, of the land and the heavens and the biology and so on and so forth is infinitely transferable, I mean, to human system. It's not like it's this mysterious thing and that we have to invent something new. No, we just have to recognize that it's already there and then use it. And how do we bring humans together? And for me, it's a both and. It's working at the level of the people in the corporations and at government, in the power positions that actually can affect change and who will. There's few of those, I might add, that really are genuinely committed to that. We see many of them in the independence movement in Australian political. There's people who would definitely be working in that sort of field. But then there's the grassroots. There's people on the ground, and it's, are we going to focus on the broken thing over here, or are we going to actually build the models on the ground? Get the communities engaged and doing things. And this is mobilizing grassroots action and not waiting for permission and not needing, as Cindy points out so well, any form of revolution, rebel action, any form of rebel action. We have to break the laws that are existing, that are keeping the laws that are killing us in perpetuity. And so there is a piece of this that is illegal. It was illegal for Rosa Parks, which she actually didn't sit at she sat in the right place in the bus, that they changed the rules while she was on the bus. The true story of Rosa Parks. Then, yeah, they had run out of space and they asked her to move further back into the further back section because there were more white people than normal. We have to break laws that are the laws that are perpetuating the systems that we have. But that's a grassroots movement as well. So that's how I see it. And I just wanted to say that's the work. And there is people everywhere willing to do this and wanting to do it. Brilliant people.
Christine, as you said the other day, and very wisely, when the people on the call were wanting to engage with the next COP, whatever number that is, which is a vaudeville. It's a show, but put on by United Nations. The United Nations, and I'm talking about the global north. So I'm really talking about the US empire.
Yeah.
UN. The United Nations only recognized in 2022 that unpolluted air was a human right. 2022, 2 years ago. And I think I'm aligned with you. I really believe that we now need to look to women and children, the unheard voices of the global south particularly, really to tap into those 5 billion unheard and invisible voices that should be asking us, what on earth have you done?
Yeah.
And give us a voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is She Changes Climate's purpose. Yeah.
Just to touch about Colleen, I just hear you so loudly. It is that thing. The hope, yes, it is in the room. It's ours. It's ours. The hope. We are the hope. Jane Sydenham Clark, you are the hope. When you ask, where's the hope? It's you. It's ours. And the thing, that's what we have to, it is, and what you've said there, Christine, it's a human coordination thing. We have to find ways to find each other, to be together, to keep moving. The clock is racing. The earth clock is racing. And the frustration of just seeing nothing happening in these places, the UN, the American empire, is overwhelming. But if we can, but we haven't got a choice. People like us get up every day. We're not capable of not doing it. We just have to keep working on the piece that we've got that is gifted to us to work on and support each other and keep going, whether we make it or not. I don't know really. I just don't know. But there's no alternative but to keep doing. And the more we connect and the more we coordinate and the more we find each other, the more chance we have of turning this thing.
So Jane had a hand up before Solomon. So Jane, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you. I so agree, Cindy, with your sentiment, but I also see the criticality of the bridges that Richard, you can potentially bring with those who are holding the levers of power in the current settings, but who are crying in doing so. I so wholeheartedly witness, as Christine has alluded to, so many leaders do not want to be decimating our future. They actually want to bring the future that their children's children deserve. They want to right these wrongs, and we need to engage them. We need to move beyond. We have to find ways to transcend the binary, the haves and haves not. We have to bring them on a journey in syntropy, of course. But we need some exemplars and some powerful leaders who are willing to actually stand up and perhaps sacrifice some of the financial benefit or capital opportunities for higher order opportunity. But we do need those bridges, and we need the places where there's influence to tap on those shoulders, to bring them into the fold, and for us to work collaboratively with them.
Yeah. Thanks, Jane. Yeah.
Yeah, thank.
Yeah. Solomon, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I have only questions in my mind as I'm listening to the discussion, and I'm going to share my questions. So there are no answers, and probably I have nothing to offer in terms of how this is going to evolve. The question is, the new system, not the one we dislike, not the one that exists. The new system is going to be a system based on the continuation of what I call the natural course of human evolution, meaning that the system is a system of governance that prioritizes two things mainly and perpetuates them. It's the creation of wealth through the focusing on profits and also the distribution of that wealth. This is the system historically, and it continues today. My question is, if we're talking about a new system that requires a transition, does this transition require also the creation of awareness among the people in general, that profits need to be measured in a different way? Because we have described that we're measuring profits without taking consideration the harm and destruction that we're creating on our planet and eventually on ourselves. So this is one question mark. If, as I'm becoming aware, we're starting to tackle the issue of how we measure the environmental cost of our profit creating enterprises today. If that happens, if we begin to tackle this and we start measuring profits in a different way, is that transition going to create an immediate wellness and welfare effect to the people? Or is it a transition that needs to be managed so we don't end up with another failed attempt
of change as it happened in the communist era of Gorbachev with perestroika. Because he tried to do things and the thing collapsed on itself. So this is one question mark. How do we manage this transition that entails also an awareness in terms of the people being ready to accept, to agree, and change the ways? So if this is one big question mark in my mind, I have no answer, so I'm just sharing it with you.
Thanks, Solomon. I'm going to get you to speak there because we've got Michelle and we're running out of time. But just to respond very quickly to that, everything that you've said needs to be checked. Definition, what is wealth? What do we measure? Paula Kensington is working on that as well as synergistic accounting. But every single assumption of what you're speaking about there, from my point of view, is an assumption that needs to be, is part of the monarchy and the current system. It needs to be completely and absolutely broken down. That's a short answer to your question.
Very short. It's a very big question.
Yeah, Michelle.
Just a couple of things quickly. Measuring is really important, and measuring GDP is like adding up all the costs and benefits and pretending they're all benefit.
Yeah.
And there's a saying I really like. If you take the letter I out of the word illness and replace it with we, you get wellness.
Yeah. That's very nice. Thank you. So we are at the end of this session, and I'm going to let Cindy close. Actually, I'm going to let Cindy close because I know that she's got something for you. But I wanted to thank you, everybody, for coming on this journey. It's been and for staying with us for the duration. And I will be sending out the replay of this in the next couple of days. But anyway, I really appreciate your attention and your wonderful questions and your thoughtful responses and your just wholehearted participation. And I will hand it over to Cindy to close.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd just like to thank, just before we do that though, which I think it's delightful to see you here, and we haven't heard anything from you. I just wondered if you had any comment or reflection that you'd like to make. You're on mute, by the way, Sue.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Cindy. I really enjoyed listening to your talk. It's really what everybody needs to listen to. That's really my point, is that I think what's missing is information. People on the street do not have the information that you just gave us just now. And even though they say, oh yeah, climate, blah, blah, they have no clue the severity of it. And I think I believe in people power. And I think that's really the way to me, we all have the power in our purses. We just have to stop buying things that we see are not right for the environment. And yeah, and I just think local communities, that's what we have to start buying local and just make sure that we improve the environment that we're in. Right now, I'm living in Ireland. I've lived in Africa my entire life. I was born in Jamaica, actually, as well. So I was interested to hear what you're saying about the West Indies, because I also know a bit about all that stuff as well. But I'm now in Ireland, the west of Ireland, and it's a beautiful country, but all the oak trees here were cut down by the Vikings. It goes way back. All this human evolving since Stone Age times, this is what's been happening. And I know that the plow is probably one of the most destructive implements that we've ever created. And so I think that I see that we have to revert back to our ancient roots and to get all those old traditions reinstated. And if we all live in communities and we all play by our community rules, which is what happens by itself, the world will improve altogether. And that's the only way. I think that's the main way to do it. And like I said, in the supermarkets, we all have the power in our purses to change things. Forget about policies and all the rest of it. That can happen too, by the by. But the most important thing is each and every person on this planet to change the way that they're doing things. That's it.
Thank you so much, Sue. That's a wonderful reflection for us to close on. My own closing piece, apart from a piece of music, is really just to thank you all. You know, I've got profound gratitude to absolutely every one of you in this room. I'm so glad that it's a small group. Some of you I know better than others. My heart is it's just full of gratitude for what you do with your lives, for the purpose that you've chosen to make yours. And when people ask me where is the hope, it's people like you. You're brave and you're beautiful, and your work is really important. And I think that if we can stay connected, Michelle, it was a real pleasure to meet you today. We do this thing of self-coordinating. We stay connected and we're there for each other. And I think that is our power. You know, individually in our despair, we're weak, but when we come together, we're really strong. Yeah, thank you so much. So we're just going to play out as we invite, please leave when you need to leave. But we're playing out with a piece of music, which again is from A Meeting by the River, which I hope is what this has been. But it's to symbolise that this wonderful fusion of what happens when human beings with this belief system that we can be an anchor ecosystem species, a keystone species, come together. So just to sit with our grace and our power. Thank you.
And everyone, the music playing, and just leave when you're ready. And thank you again.
Mhm.